This is wonderful, Kathryn, but at the same time, I'm going to be really, really happy when tomorrow afternoon comes along.
I'm sure.
It's just very on.
Yeah.
So I just need to put it into the right place. There we go. And then I check my phone. You'd think I was, knew exactly what I think a lot of it is I just think I'm not going to be confident that it's where I'm supposed to be until I've actually seen it somewhere else.
I think we're on.
I think we are.
Might be there. Well done.
We're on.
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. We're now on Thursday of our Family Voice Surrey annual event, where we've been talking all things early years, and actually we've gone off on tangents and further because we have so many lovely questions from parents who've been early years parents and aren't any longer, and they're remembering what helped and what might not. And we've done a lot of thinking about how we help ourselves as parents to be able to help our children. And those of you who were with us with Kathryn yesterday will have heard us talk precisely about that. And Kathryn's been really generous with her time and is back again to answer your questions. And we've already got a list of them. If you are with us on Facebook right now, please don't hesitate to pop in any questions. I've got a lovely colleague, don't know who, I can't remember, it got delegated, but someone is there and will send me the questions. We just get on with it here at Family Voice. It's a bit scrappy at times. Good morning, Kathryn. How are you?
Good morning. I'm well. Thank you. And how are you?
I'm well. I'm energized and exhausted all at the same time. These events are always really exciting because they give us this really intense interaction between speakers and professionals and parents. It's a really lovely way to get together. And at the same time, missing the opportunity to be in the same room with people in that way. But yes, so we talked yesterday about, how do we look after each other, ourselves as parents, didn't we? And we've had an awful lot of things. And I'm kind of going to get there with, I'm going to start with the first question that popped into my list. And this is a parent who would like some advice for dealing with disbelieving parents, relatives, friends, people at school who think that we're just making excuses for our child, or we're seeing something that isn't there. We get, are we being overprotective or over anxious? How can we help ourselves? And I suppose find a way to communicate that to others.
Yes. And of course, as you were saying that, it made me think that is also related to us believing what we're seeing, which we may have really mixed feelings about. We may not want to know that our children are struggling with this or that more than another child. We may also think, are we seeing things? Or part of us might be feeling quite frustrated and think, surely you can do this, or surely you should be able to do this. And the shoulds really cause us trouble in life, don't they? The more we can drop the shoulds. But you're talking about the way that relatives or friends might, in a sense, be saying the should word, even if they're not saying it out loud. It's a kind of, surely he shouldn't be behaving like that, or surely she should be able to manage this.
Yes, and I think it's also true, isn't it, when we, as a parent, when we've gone through that really difficult process of accepting that our child is struggling, and we come to present it often to people where we're seeking support.
Yes.
To be faced with that lack of belief.
Yes.
Is crushing.
Yeah, it is. And of course, there'll be so many different strands in the mix. So there will always be worth in thinking, well, what's the meaning for this person I'm telling? So if it's granny or gran or nan or granddad or grandpa, is it partly their grief about the fact that their grandson or granddaughter is struggling and they really wish that wasn't the case? And this is their way of showing it. It's to say, no, he's fine. Of course he can do it. Because they can't quite bear to hear that there's something that actually is really a struggle. And they might have their own process of coming to terms with it, but they might not have the emotional skills to do it. Is that what you're seeing in their response?
It's really fun. Yeah, it's because I found myself, there were times, and I've heard this from others, where you turn to your parents for help and you end up having to almost parent them through that process as well.
Yeah. Yes. So I guess partly it's understanding that there are reasons for the meaning for that person, but that's really tough when actually what you want in that moment is to have your parent or your friend being the big arms to say, oh gosh, that sounds so hard and I really want to support you. Let me know what I can do. Yeah, that's what you want to hear, isn't it? And yet people come out with their own ways of managing what feels a difficult situation they're not quite sure how to respond to.
And is there anything that we can do as parents to, I suppose, now I look back and I think I wanted to be able to say, I need to be able to lean on you. I need you to just take my word for what I'm saying. Yeah. Do you have any, is there any kind of phrase or yes, how can we go about?
Well, I think that word need is very helpful, because what you have pointed out is that the clearer we become about what we need, the easier it is to ask for someone to meet that need. They may not be able to, but if we can put in words what our need is, then, and this is true in any bit of life actually, it's not just in this situation, but it's the same thing, same skill that is a really useful one that this situation is giving you the possibility of learning a little bit more of. It's a skill we all need and we all have to keep learning. But how do you think, right, what do I need? And if there's a particular thing you need from this particular person, that you find a way of saying, what I really need is, and share it with them and say, are you able to help me with this? And they might not be able to say yes.
Yeah.
And then it's how to accept what they can manage at that moment and find as much empathy in your heart as you can muster to recognize what they can manage. They may not be there yet. They might be able to offer something different. They might be able to offer something in a way that comes out the wrong way, Yeah. Again, can you accept the way in which your parent or your friend or your relative does it? They're not going to be perfect, because none of us are. Can you mix all of the distress or the upset or the anger you might feel about that, make the best of it? And I mean that really in a positive way.
Yeah.
You be creative and think, okay, they can't manage that, or they can't manage to say that, but maybe they could do this. And things may change. They may well be able to change over time. I don't know whether you've had that experience, looking back.
I think it's, I certainly with my family, we had a lot of love, a lot of offers of support from a place of, we don't understand this is very new, we don't know what to do.
Yes.
We had periods where there really wasn't an acceptance. We had some really challenging behavior from our children at times, and my parents in particular found that very hard to see, and they stopped seeing their grandchildren at times and saw a person who was abusing their child. And that was tremendously difficult. Yeah. And then actually it was probably when my children were in their teen years that somewhere they'd got bits of information about autism in particular, and they were suddenly able to see the situation in a different light. And I do remember that it was really subtle, but I found myself one summer going there and thinking, oh, I can breathe a little bit easier, because they actually see the disability element, that this is not a choice my child is making.
Yes.
And that was, it was very healing, actually. It brought me back, I was able to take myself back in time and heal that younger me a little bit in that. And I think you're right, and with family and friends, that feels like the right way to go. I think what feels really difficult, and I wonder as a professional what you would say, it feels really, really frightening as a parent to show any vulnerability when we are advocating for our child with professionals, be it schools or anybody else. And the notion of saying, I need,
Yes.
can be tremendously difficult,
Mm.
because you then get that you often get a response of, well, you need a parenting course, or you're not doing this right.
Mm.
You are overprotective and over anxious. There's nothing wrong here. It's a different conversation, isn't it, than with relatives. And I wonder, how can we support parents and advise parents to manage that part of the journey?
I mean, the thing that comes to my mind, first of all, is with all of this, the importance in being able to talk about all this with somebody else, whether that's someone who's similarly struggling to work out how to manage this with their family or friends, or with professionals they're involved with. That's why Family Voice is so helpful, the connections people can make, because these moments are really difficult and they're very vulnerable making, aren't they? And if you go to a professional you're working with and their response doesn't meet where you need it to meet, that's very difficult, and can you go away and write down what you think is going on, and then talk with someone else and get their view. Have I written it in a way that explains what it is that I need? And can you hold on to knowing what you know, and trust that you do know your child the best? You are the one who sees day by day what he or she needs, and what might look overprotective to one person is meeting your child's needs.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because I remember this sense, and it was actually from another parent. I heard this years ago, and I absolutely bought into the fact that I was clearly over anxious. I was overprotective. I was the problem. And another parent said to me, but you're not overprotective. You are a mum. You are protective because your child needs protection.
Yes.
And actually, she was absolutely spot on.
And yet, as parents, we need to be very courageous in allowing ourselves, when we can, if we can, to say, is there any truth in it? Am I being overprotective in that situation? Is there something I might be a bit braver about? Because there might be a grain of truth in it. I mean, usually there's a bit of truth in everything in a way, but that may not be the important thing in that moment. You may be absolutely protecting your child, but is there a way you could help your child to gain that skill? And it's hard for any parent, but when you see that your children have particular vulnerabilities or needs, and maybe they haven't got words, or maybe that they're quite quick to feel overwhelmed, it's really hard to trust that other people will know what to do, isn't it?
Yes.
And that takes courage.
I wanted to ask you, we hear so many times from families that they will approach a professional, or it might be a school, it might be someone in the mental health world, or a doctor, and there will be an issue that's going on that maybe something is, let's say school trip is happening, and as a parent you go and you say, well, I need to know how you're going to support my child, and what you're going to do with this, that, and the other. And the answer from the professionals is, it'll be all right. Don't worry, it'll be fine.
Yes.
I wonder, as a professional, is that something that I suppose you get taught to do? Is it part of the reassurance? And do professionals understand well enough that actually is one of the most frightening things you can say to a parent who has a child with additional needs?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm laughing because it just seems such a familiar thing. And of course, I mean, I say, of course, that's not part of any training to kind of over reassure, but I think it probably comes quite naturally to us as human beings, doesn't it? To try to reassure, to try and say, don't worry, it'll be fine, because we want it to be fine. Yes. One, and another thing might be, if I really think about this, I don't know quite what the answer is. Or how am I going to work this one out? I've got 20 other children to look after, and I don't know quite how to really give this child what they need. There might be all sorts of worries going through, mightn't there? And I guess what I would suggest in that situation, and I'm sure this is what you have learned to do over the years, Benedicte, but it is to hold on to what you know, and to say, the trip that's happening, we need to have a meeting in advance. with the people who are going and with me, so we can think about what will make it work and enjoyable for my son or my daughter, and just be very factual about it. That just has to happen. It's not, do you think maybe possibly we could perhaps, it's
this week,
in order to make this work, this is what we need to do. When should we do it?
It's really difficult, isn't it? Because being factual and helpful in the face of a system where I think what you describe is exactly what parents feel a lot of the time is, actually, you're telling me it'll be fine because you don't know the answer. And what I then want to say to you is, okay, so if my child has epilepsy, who is epilepsy trained for my child who will be on that trip?
Yes.
And if there's nobody, that's a problem, and we need to actually be really.
So we have to make a plan for this, and
we
need to write it down. So we make a plan, and we think, okay, so I know for my child that we need to name who's the person who's going to be there, who is epilepsy trained, and who's the person who's going to be with him when he goes to the toilet or when he has his lunch or whatever the issues are. Who knows him? Who does he know? Who does he feel safe with? You know,
I'm really kind of minded of one of the themes that we hear a lot at Family Voice, and it's becoming, I don't know, it feels increasingly important, is that as parent carers, there isn't an advocacy service to help us. And when we've had to go through something like that, and there are loads of different possibilities, but often we are having to advocate for our child. And and one of the hardest things is when we have to say to a professional, to a school, to a doctor, how are you going to do this? Have you thought about the epilepsy training? And they haven't. And so they then become defensive. And if you have the resilience and the ability as a parent, you can get through that, you can get what your child needs. But often, or sometimes at the cost of that relationship with that school. And mostly as a parent, you come out at the other end of it battle weary, shall we say. And I wonder, how can we support parents to replenish themselves after something like that, because it marks you, doesn't it, and can stay for a really long time.
Yes. Well, I suppose, I mean, there are two things to say. One is, sometimes, of course, it becomes an uncomfortable or frustrating or even an angry conversation. And it's in those moments and again, this is important across our lives, isn't it? When we're feeling upset or like someone is letting us down or they're not getting it, how do we try to keep holding our empathy for the position that other person is in? Because the more we can do that, the more likely we'll be able to communicate respectfully and come up with an answer. But that's not always easy, and I completely hear what you're saying. And we've all been in those situations. So that is one that we and in terms of advocates, is there someone who can come with you for those conversations, who in a sense can help you and accompany you and even hear what happened so that you can talk about it together afterwards. It might not be that they need to talk, but it might be a friend or a sibling or someone who can be there with you. Who might that be?
It brings us back to that idea, doesn't it, of connections, and you were saying yesterday about it takes a village.
Yes.
And I think that leads in really nicely to the next question that I've got on my list, and I'd really value any kind of either signposting or insights you have. We have a parent who says, how can you look after yourself when you are a single parent and your child takes up 100% of your time? And
yes.
I know we all feel as parents, don't we, that parenting isn't overwhelming all the time, but actually the reality is if you've got a complex child and you're on your own, you are always on. You're often not sleeping very much, you're not eating very well, and the notion of being able to meet other people can be absolutely impossible. Help.
And that relates to your question just before about replenishing, which is how do we replenish as a parent, and particularly how do you replenish as a single parent? And first of all, I think a good place to start is to say, just what a magnificent job parents are doing 24 hours a day. And when you're a single parent, you are doing a superhuman magnificent job, because it is 24 hours a day without someone there. Not that all couples, of course, work well together. It goes up and down, doesn't it, as a parental couple. But to be on the case 24 hours a day is quite an extraordinary feat. So what to do about that? And I guess one part of it is absolutely linked to, it takes a village to raise a child. Who is your village? You know, do you have anyone in your village? If not, who might help you even think how to bring people into your village? Because that will make it a bit different, you know, and of course it depends what your particular child's needs are and their age, and whether they're in nursery or school, whether you're working, how many hours you're working, all these things, of course. But it's almost starting small with, what's one small thing that you might be able to make space for you? Yeah. So not you as a mother, not you as a working woman, or as a daughter or a sister, or you know, whatever other roles you have, but as a woman in your role as you. And really to start small, how might you take 5 minutes to connect with something meaningful for you? Maybe you've forgotten what that even is.
Yeah.
What did you used to like doing? You know, I always say knitting in those moments for some reason, but you know, it probably isn't knitting, but it could be, you know. Could it be knitting? Could it be putting on a favorite piece of music from years ago that you've forgotten you love? Because music, if you like music and you connect with it, is the most amazing thing, because it connects our souls, doesn't it, and our hearts with something. Is it to stretch? Is it to get outside and look at the sky? Again, being outside really matters and changes our whole physiology and our feelings and our hormones. I think we underestimate how important that is. So there are two things in there, aren't there? One is how to build your village, your support network. It's very tempting when someone says that, just like I'm saying it, to think, yeah, it's all right for you to say. How am I going to do that? There's no one obvious. There isn't anyone. I would like to invite you to take a deep breath, get a bit of paper, and just write down who there might be. It might just be going, it might be going to the local shop and saying hello to the shopkeeper when you go and buy something, and just having that kind of connection. It might be, you know, the thing I said yesterday about leaving a voice message for a friend who you agree you're going to swap voice messages. So you just talk for 3 minutes on a voice message and say how you're feeling that day, and they can do the same back for you.
And what I would say is I would really invite any parent in that situation to join Family Voice if you're not there, and contact your local coordinator. You know, we're there for signposting, but we are all parent carers. We have some single parents on our team, and it might be that beginning, that start. We can't provide a service as such, but we can provide an area of connection, and we all have such individual circumstances. The other thing that I wanted to say is I think we all fall into the trap of thinking of single parents as mums, but we do know that there are some dads, and actually we know that single dads probably are far more isolated even than single mums. To the dads out there, I would give the similar thing. You know, we absolutely welcome dads as much as mums. And I think that the big message is that there is no easy solution. And the fact that you feel lost and isolated is because it's really, really hard. And I think your advice about building that village, it's going to take one. And actually, maybe your village will be one person to start with. And it might grow to maybe 3. But actually 3 is a wealth when you've got the right people in place, isn't it?
And actually it's acknowledging that it is hard, isn't it? It is, and it's lonely. And it's how we're kind to ourselves in recognizing that. And if you find it hard, you're not alone, that other single parents with children, even without additional needs, find it hard. And it's okay to acknowledge that with others as well.
So that we were talking about, feeling lonely. I have a parent who says, is it wrong to feel angry?
Oh, goodness me. You know what? There's nothing wrong with any emotion. All emotions are okay. All emotions are really useful signs of what's going on inside us. If you can name your emotion, fantastic. If you know it's anger, how useful, because we don't always even know that we're angry. It comes out in other ways, doesn't it? And anger is probably one of the least acceptable emotions in society, isn't it? Stop being angry, or don't show your anger. And often it's one of the least acceptable because our parents didn't really know how to handle our anger, because culturally that was not so acceptable. So nothing wrong with feeling angry. If you're feeling furious, if you're feeling sometimes out of control with anger, it's really helpful that you know it, and to be able to kind of work out the meaning of it and where that anger comes from and why you're feeling angry and what might help it is the next stage, really.
It's really interesting, because I read that question, and I know that my children would go, oh, you're just going to tell us that all emotions are fine. But we don't like feeling this way, Mother.
Don't like it. That's the issue, isn't it? And we don't really like seeing it in our children, and we want them, we really, it's much easier to be with happy feelings in other people and in ourselves. We might feel quite guilty about being angry. You might be, maybe there's real guilt about feeling angry. Maybe that question partly means I feel really guilty that I'm so angry that my child has these problems.
Yes, and we had quite a lot of questions actually about how do you deal with that guilt that's there all the time, and it's difficult to identify what we feel guilty about as well. Sometimes, isn't it?
It is.
I felt guilty because there are times when I've really not liked my children, or wished they hadn't been born, or wished they weren't there, or all of these dreadful thoughts where you think, oh my goodness, but this is my child. How can I be thinking these things?
It's so helpful that you put it in words, though, because most people will feel that at times. That's how it is. It's a really rocky road, isn't it? And parenthood is a rocky road. Again, you don't have to have children with additional needs not to have those feelings either. This is too much.
One of the things that I remember, particularly when they were little, there were two things that I kept hearing, that and I don't know how real they are. There was the parent who said, oh, I wish it was me going through what my child is, because it's seeing them suffer is really difficult. And then the other one is, my child is, really ill or has these problems, but is always happy. And I would look at these things and think, well, my child is not always happy. My child is a little brat on a regular basis, leukemia or not. Yes, he looks all sweet, but he's just vile at times. And that made me feel like a dreadful parent. And then the other bit was that for me, I didn't want to be the one with leukemia. And I felt really guilty because I was supposed to feel like that. And part of it, I could rationalize and say, well, there's no use me being ill with leukemia, because then my kids get left with no mum. But actually at the heart is this really uncomfortable feeling where I'm glad I'm not ill.
Yes. Yeah. And I guess, again, that's really helpful. You put that in words. And in a way, the question also points to the fact that we're so quick to think there's a way we should be feeling. Yes. And if we're not feeling that way, is there something wrong with us? And we all have different experiences. We all have different upbringings, different journeys into parenthood. Some of us actively chose it. Some of us found ourselves pregnant and parents. Some of us had a child that actually we don't like or we find really difficult to be with, and the temperament of their child and or maybe their needs, their additional needs make it really hard for us. But it's quite a taboo to say that, isn't it? But this thing about how I'm supposed to feel or what I'm supposed to do can consume us. And the more we're aware that, it's okay to be yourself, and it may not feel okay, when you're feeling uncomfortable, but there isn't a particular way.
No. We have oh, this is a really lovely one. I'm going to be dotting all over the place because there's so many. So there are loads and loads of questions, and we'll collate them a little bit later. I think I'm trying to focus particularly today on that idea of parent well-being, because we've got some more specific things.
Yeah.
It feels like this is what we should be talking about. This parent says, how can I manage the waves of grief as my baby and child doesn't reach milestones, especially if it's in your face a lot from staying in touch with your antenatal group?
Oh, I know. Oh, just such huge empathy for you. You know, isn't it hard managing grief? My goodness.
And it cycles, doesn't it? It doesn't go away.
No, it's so hard. And I guess it's the fact you're aware of it is great. You know, there are so many people who can't even bear knowing that they're grieving, and it's so helpful that you know it. And I guess it's important to think, how does my body and mind know that I'm grieving? How does it come out in you? What does it feel like? How does it affect you? And what do you need in those moments? I'm always feeling it in my body. You know, what do you need? Do you need to move your position? Do you need to let your shoulders just relax? Do you need some water? Do you need to be outside? What soothes your soul and your body a bit? You know, what lets the muscles just let go a tiny bit in your back?
And it sounds from what you're saying that actually almost step one is being able to identify what's going on inside you as grief. And we don't talk about grief very much, do we?
We don't. It's so helpful you're even naming it in the question. And then to be curious about how it is in you, because it's different in everybody. Maybe that sounds a strange way of putting it, to be curious, but it's important, I think, to know how it affects you. Does it mean when you're grieving, and you know, in that moment, what do you do that's helpful or not helpful for you? That means it has an impact on the next moment or the next moment, you know.
I'm going to put you on the spot, Kathryn, here, and you know, if you know something that we can then find later. I'm wondering whether there are any resources to, I suppose, to find out, to understand what actually, when I stop and think, what is grief? I don't know that I can answer that question. And I'm wondering, I suppose, I know I felt it in completely different ways. I know I found myself feeling like I've reached a kind of acceptance and I know where I'm going with my children. And then something happens and I think, oh my God, I'm back in that denial space, and maybe I'm back in a grief pattern. Are there any resources that parents can look at to try that?
There are, and maybe I'll have a think about which one to suggest, and we could put it onto this Facebook page.
That would be fantastic. Thank you very, very much.
The other thing I would say about grief is, just as you said, that it can come and go at different stages, and in a way for us not to be too surprised by that of course it will come back. Now, is that noise of tree surgeon in the background a bit bothering?
I think we're fine. We can hear you clearly. Don't worry. It's absolutely fine.
All right. If it's a problem, I could close my window.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. So one of the other things that's come up, and that's maybe a little bit more practical, I don't know, but it feels like it fits this, is because we live in a world that's quite open, and there's real advantages, isn't there? Because we can find information more easily than we could 10, 20 years ago. But we also hear more frightening stories. And we've heard a lot in the last couple of years about children, young people, often with autism or with additional needs, being really badly treated as they grow older. And we've had some questions about how as a parent, how do you deal with the sense of constant underlying fear about your child's future? And often these parents, the ones we're hearing from, they've got their heads around the fact that their child has additional needs, is going to have a different future than they might have envisaged, but they will always be a vulnerable person and therefore at risk from the very services that are supposed to support them. And we know we won't always be there. So there's this, a lot of us have this constant fear of how will our child be safe? And I suppose the question is, how do we how do we cope and deal with that fear, because it's consuming and it drains energy.
Yes, yes.
Impossible question, I suppose, but
it is. And a plane was coming over, and I was just I was going with the moment with this plane and the noise, and just thinking about this fear and anticipation. I mean, I think anticipation of what might happen can paralyze us, can't it? And that's whatever in life we are worrying about. So there's a general point here, which is, what is, you know, for the person who asks the question, and for all the rest of us who can feel fear, because that's a normal experience. Can you think about what helps you to go, do you know what, it's okay, let's go one day at a time, or let's go 1 week at a time, or 1 month, or 1 year? What's the plan for now? What works now? What is a safety net now? Because we can't predict actually how our child will be in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. We can't predict that. And that, of course, the uncertainty is what we all find very hard as well. We've had a big dose of that with the pandemic, haven't we? Managing uncertainty has been a really costly, emotionally costly experience, hasn't it? But it's the same issue. It's uncertainty. That's what we're fearing. And in a way, no one can say you're not right to worry, because of course it's a worry. What will it be like when we have an older child, or we're not there? But it's to keep on knowing that you have a lot of power to plan and to think about what safety nets might be there, and it's okay to ask the question and to think, is this safe, is it not? And get your support network to support you and think with you about whether your reaction is reasonable.
It's hard, isn't it? Because there's that dual thing of, as a human being, I need to safeguard my emotions, and a lot of my personal coping mechanisms are to go, yeah, I can't predict the future, I'm just going to just ignore it. If I fall under a bus tomorrow, I'm not going to be able to do anything. Which is a personal, slightly dark and twisted way of coping with things. But at the same time, we are our child's person. We are responsible for them. And so there is that need to learn and to plan. And you know, one of the things that we do at Family Voice is we try and provide training for parents when they ask us. And one of the things that comes up quite frequently, and I would absolutely signpost parents towards the charity that we work with most in this sector, is East Surrey MenCap. I've got to look up what there is in the, I don't know why it's East Surrey specifically, but MenCap offers an awful lot of support and training for how to plan for the future, and what legal safeguards you can put in place. I think there's also, for me, that practical bit is about learning how the system works and building relationships. I'm learning, you know, because my children are older. I had quite complicated children in the early years, and the idea of making relationship with the GP was nonsense. My GP, bless them, were lovely, but they looked at my child's notes and went, yeah, no, go and see your consultant. Now, as they're entering adult life, actually the GP is becoming my go-to person. And part of my way of managing that fear of what will happen to them is building a relationship with the GP. And helping the GP know my children through me. Exactly. And I think it's that feeling of, if I can get, it was actually another mum that we're going to be speaking to later, Yvonne Newbold. She talks in her book about, if I can get enough people to care about my child, I will safeguard them against.
Yes, that's beautifully put, isn't it? Yes.
I thought that was really lovely. And I think it's what I find myself doing, but I think it's something that we can start doing when they're very little, isn't it?
And I guess that's what that's made me think about, is that, of course, part of this is about helping our children enjoy being part of communities, being part of relationships. So as you say, they are loved and appreciated and valued, and they value and appreciate others, so that they have that trust in others, because you've helped them develop it. They have people who will look out for them. And it might be that you even, I was almost imagining around the planning, you might get an A4 piece of paper and think, well, who are my current go-to people for me, and who are they for my children? there might be one person, there might be two, you know, who is, like you said, is it the GP, and how do I strengthen that relationship? Is a lovely way of thinking about it.
We've done a number of bits. I mean, there's a part of me that that surrenders to the things that I can't control, and that's been a really, really difficult journey for me. And at the same time, I now have somewhere hidden on my computer, I think I called it the emergency plan. And I started it by writing to my children. I said, you know, I think I did it about 2 years ago. And I wrote a little paragraph for each of them saying, I think you're doing amazingly well. This is where I see you heading, but that might change. Whatever you do, it will be great. But at the moment, this is the direction I see you heading in. And then I followed it up also with practical, you know, what bills do we pay? That kind of thing. Where do you find passwords to this, that, and the other? And then the other thing that I did, which I haven't spoken to them about, but it really helped me deal with that fear, is I made a list of people I trust. And without going so far as to find, you know, look at guardianships, etc., it was just actually, I know that these people will answer if my children need them. But it was a really difficult exercise. It's far from finished. I haven't looked at it for at least a year because life gets in the way. But I think you're right in finding time every now and again to go, right, now I can look at this question and see, and is there, you know, my biggest fear for a long time was that because of the way my family was set up, there was nobody who could take the children if something happened to my husband and I. There just wasn't anybody. So what could I plan? And I thought about it, and I was really scared by it, and I didn't find a solution. And so I just ignored it for a while. And the only way to deal with that fear sometimes was just to shut it down, shut it away, because there wasn't a solution. And I don't know that is. And, you know, as time has gone on, it's changed. But it's finding that line, isn't it, between the two things? Can I ask, we've had a lot of because we have amazing parents on this group, you can imagine, Kathryn, that their focus is, I want to help my child. That's what I'm here for. And we've been really kind of pushing, I think with you, I think really importantly, to help your child, you need to look after yourself and you need to help yourself. We also know that we've got a lot of parents who've got additional health needs themselves. So it's really important. But I thought this was a nice kind of in the middle, is how as a parent can we help our child accept their diagnosis or their additional needs, their limitations?
Yes, that is it is a good question to think about. And again, we can put that in the context of how do we help any child, any of our children, to get to know who they are, to get to be interested in what they like and what they don't like in life, what makes them happy, what makes them scared, what they find difficult, what things they need to avoid. So in a way, it's within this much bigger context, and maybe a way to answer the question is to stand back and think about it in a broader way. You know, how can I help my child get to know themselves? And
I
almost,
like that.
You know, step back from the diagnosis, which of course is in your mind, is right here in front of your eyes. Just let that, you know, float back a little bit into the mix of this whole person, your child. And maybe a way into the conversation, and the diagnosis bit might come in not straight away. Maybe don't go straight for that, but go more for, and I don't even mean it's a sit down, have a conversation. It might be using opportunities to say, oh, you know, it was so lovely seeing you enjoy being in the water, because you just love it, don't you? You know, whether that's in the bath or that's in the swimming pool or whatever, again, depending on the needs or abilities of your child. Notice what gives them delight. Notice what is good. Or when they have a difficult moment, say, oh, that was really difficult. I think that it was difficult last time, wasn't it? Maybe we've learned something useful here, that it doesn't work so well when we, whatever it is, get home this late, or go out with more than 2 people, or go into a place where there's lots of noise, or wear socks that feel like that because I don't like the feeling on my feet. Really be interested and notice.
It's very interesting, isn't it? Because I think that feels really important, that notion of self-awareness and self-knowledge. And I've had conversations with parents over the years about when do you help a child understand kind of what's going on? And it always seems to come at the age a little bit later, maybe, when they or other children notice difference.
Yeah.
We hear from families who want to make life as normal as possible, and they don't want to label their children, quite understandably.
Yes.
And then there is this, that feeling, you think, well, I've got to say something because it's got to the point where something feels really uncomfortable. We also have families who have used words almost from the outset. And I was, one of my children has something called Noonan syndrome, and it's a genetic condition. It explains all of the myriad issues that he has. And our decision very early on was to use that word as part of our daily vocabulary, as part of his self-identity. It was much more subtle and complicated with the autistic issues. But we chose to use labels because our children were coming to us and saying, well, why am I different? Why am I different? And it came across as such what they were saying to me was, I'm less than. I'm not as good as. And we found that initially it wasn't even a diagnosis, it was talking about the fact that people's brains are different, and some of them we call autistic and others aren't. And actually, maybe you've got more of an autistic brain than this kind of brain. So without putting a diagnosis, and we found that those conversations really helped them, because it was about that self-identity and self-awareness.
Yes.
And finding the positives as well as the negative.
Yes. And partly that's about noticing and observing it, and it's almost finding a way of doing it without there necessarily being an assumption that it's a bad thing. It's just and I know, as I say that, of course, if there's a particular way in which our brain functions or our body functions, it means we're different. It can often not feel like that's okay. I know that, but there's something about saying, that we've learned that about you, that's something that you find difficult, and yet some of your friends in class, they find easy. Do you know what? Everybody, as well as human beings, have things. Some of them are obvious and some are hidden. And you have no idea some of the things that they will be managing at home, or worries or things in their families. Everybody has things. And what's helpful is we know what your talents are and what your struggles are, so that we can then make life as interesting and fun and life-giving as it can be. So in a way, that's
I think one of the times that I found myself thinking, oh yes, this is it just felt like a really powerful moment, was when my youngest was we've had this conversation with him a few times. I think the first time he may have been only 6 and his speech was very limited, but we'd been speaking to him about his syndrome since he was tiny. He spent a lot of time in hospital, and he came to me and he said, Mommy, I want a t-shirt. I want it to say, my name is Tom, I have Rome. It took me 3 days to figure out that Rome was Noonan syndrome. But he identified with that diagnosis, and it's been very interesting over the years, because he says, Mommy, Noonan syndrome makes my heart go wrong, doesn't it? Yes, I really don't like that. But if I didn't have Noonan syndrome, I wouldn't be me. But no, that's right. So it's probably good then. And
how interesting, how lovely.
Yeah, and having those conversations, I've found
Yeah.
have been really interesting, and it's really scary to start with. But we've never, I don't think that I've used the word diagnosis very much.
No.
I have used words like autism and Noonan's because they're a shortcut as well. So I have my Noonie, and I have my, well, they were 2 Aspies because they were diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. And we've been, I suppose we've been brave enough to tease them about it at home sometimes. And we try and bring out those qualities that we identify with those labels in the positive and the bad. But you're right, I think it's about that. Who are you and what makes you super cool as a kid?
And you see, we have an idea about what a particular word means or diagnosis means, but our child might have a completely different idea about it. So it's so important to not rush in with our ideas or our meanings, but to notice what it means for our child. They might, you might be really worried that by talking about it that they're going to be very upset, but they might say, oh, that makes sense of it. Oh, all right then.
I love that.
And that is the case for some children. It's like, oh, okay. And then for others, it might take more processing. And then also there's the fact that each developmental stage, it might mean something different to your child, just like everything, And
presumably some of them will go, oh, okay, bye, I'm going to play football.
Yeah, yes. And you'll be like, hold on, I was wanting to have an hour conversation about this. Like, it's not the moment.
Yeah.
And the other thought I had about it was, oh, it's gone. It'll come back. Yeah, so carry on. Sorry.
I'm really aware that we're coming to the end of our time. I think, can I ask you one final question? Because it brings us back to parents and to actually what can a parent who's listening right now, what could they do today? And this parent says, are there any techniques I can use to refocus and reset when things are really challenging?
Well, one technique, I mentioned it yesterday, Benedicte, which I share with parents, is to plant a seed. And seed stands for S for sleep, E for eating, E for exercise, and D for delighting. And when you're feeling overwhelmed, that you don't know where to start, there's too much of everything going on, your child is in a difficult place, you're in a difficult place, you don't quite know how to start, it's to choose one of those 4 things. Plant a seed with one of them, either thinking about it through the eyes of your child or through your eyes. So you might choose exercise. And by that, I don't even mean going off and doing a 5-kilometer run. I mean moving your body, just moving, or move rooms, go outside. Can you take 5 minutes to do something for yourself where you move and you're in touch with your body again and you notice how you're feeling? Can you just simply do that today? If you're a person who likes writing things down, write it down. Write it down as a daily habit you're going to do for the next 5 days. I'm going to move my body for 5 minutes a day. If 5 minutes sounds okay. If that sounds too long, do it write down for 1 minute. And just do that for 5 days. And when we make these little tiny steps, it gives us again a sense of maybe I can make things happen. Maybe I can make a change. And sometimes just a little shift in one thing makes us feel maybe I am the competent parent that other people think I am, or that I sometimes think I am. Or if you never think you are, maybe I'll show you another picture from that book, actually.
Yeah, let me make sure that you can share the screen.
Yeah, thank you.
Here it goes, that should work now.
So let me show you one more picture.
I was, when you were saying that, I was imagining myself in the middle of a meltdown situation, thinking, oh, I could have said, oh, I'm hungry, shall we go and have a biscuit? And just that, how can you break the what's happening right now? And I love the fact that you talk about really small things.
Really small things. So here's this picture from Charles Mackay's book. Sometimes, said the horse. Sometimes what? Asked the boy. Sometimes just getting up and carrying on is brave and magnificent.
That's wonderful. I think I'm looking at the time, and I'm thinking that is just such an amazing place to end. And I think to remind everybody watching that you are all brave and magnificent.
You are.
Thank you so much, Kathryn. Thank you for the time. I know that I've got loads of questions that I haven't got through, so I'm going to spend some time in the next few weeks collating and letting you have that feedback as well. And hopefully we can keep that conversation going somehow, if that's all right with you.
Absolutely. I'd love that.
Thank you so much. And thank all of you for having joined us. Those of you who came to us later, keep sending your questions in. We are always open for business when questions and stories are involved.